The silence before dawn shattered without warning. A piercing wail sliced through the firehouse, high, urgent, unnatural. It wasn't the kind of sound that let you think. It was the kind that made your body move before your mind caught up. Cassie's boots hit the floor before the second beep. She moved fast, adrenaline rising, heart steady. She always moved fast because they never waited for her. Inside the firehouse kitchen, half the crew was already suiting up. She reached for her jacket. No one handed it to her. No one ever did. Captain Mertz didn't look up as he called names. He skipped hers. Again. She stared at the chalkboard where her name had been erased, replaced by Hodges. That warehouse on Milner Street was already billowing smoke. And Cassie? She was about to climb into the truck anyway, with or without their approval, because someone had to show up for the people trapped inside. Someone had to breathe through the fire, even when their oxygen ran out. And tonight, when the captain froze in the blaze, Cassie moved straight into the flames. Cassie moved before her eyes fully opened. The floor was cold against her feet as she grabbed her gear heart, thudding in sync with the alarm's shriek still echoing in the hall. She didn't wait for a summons. She never did. Because waiting meant falling behind, and falling behind meant being left out again. Downstairs, the usual scramble unfolded. Men barking over one another, pulling jackets, securing helmets, snapping straps with mechanical precision. The kitchen lights flickered above them, casting sharp shadows across the grey linoleum. No one looked her way. Captain Mertz stood with the clipboard, his brow creased in familiar irritation. Engine 1, Gibson Hodges Torres, Ladder Miller Rains, backup Dawson McConnell. He paused, then slammed the clipboard against the wall, his eyes sliding past Cassie, like she wasn't even air. That's it. Move. Her name was missing again. She stood still for a moment. She could feel the burn behind her ribs, the silent fury that had no place here. Anger didn't earn you spots on the rig. Not in Station 49, and certainly not if you were the only woman under 30 in a town where the firehouse still hung portraits of retired chiefs like holy relics. Cassie pulled on her turnout jacket anyway. The straps were stiff, no one ever helped her adjust them. She'd stopped expecting it. Torres brushed past her on the way to the truck, his shoulder clipping hers hard enough to make her stagger. "Stay behind, rookie," he muttered without stopping. "I've been here 2 years," she called after him, voice low but cutting. But he was already gone. Outside, the trucks growled to life under orange streetlights. The warehouse fire on Milner Street had already triggered a second alarm. Dispatch reports mentioned hazardous materials, chemicals, solvents, unknown quantities. Cassie walked to the second truck, tightening her gloves. She wasn't technically assigned. She didn't care. She climbed into the back bench without permission. No one kicked her out. But no one said she belonged either. The town of Langley Ridge was the kind of place that hadn't changed much in 50 years. Red brick storefronts, a diner where everyone knew your father's name, volunteer honor boards hanging above church coat racks. Cassie had grown up 25 miles north in a smaller, colder place, but she'd come to Langley Ridge because she wanted real experience. She wanted structure, respect, and fire. Instead, she'd walked into a wall of unspoken codes. Let the boys handle it. She'll freeze when it matters. Too emotional for high heat. They said it behind her back, loud enough to reach her anyway. Her only real ally was McConnell. Jimmy McConnell. Early 40s, divorced, soft-spoken. A paramedic who didn't talk much unless it mattered. He didn't treat Cassie like a novelty. He treated her like a person. "You're quiet tonight," he said once after a small kitchen fire call. She was sitting on the tailgate of the engine, sipping warm Gatorade. "Sometimes yelling doesn't work," she replied. He nodded like he understood something deeper than the words. But Jimmy wasn't on shift tonight, and that made everything harder. The warehouse loomed as they arrived, an old distribution center tucked beside the train yard. Flames curled along the roof like fingers beckoning them inside. Acrid smoke rose in heavy black gusts. Somewhere inside, something exploded with a hollow boom. The crew spilled out. Orders were shouted. Hoses uncoiled like snakes. Captain Mertz stood still at the edge of the lot, helmet on, radio clipped frozen. Cassie saw it before anyone else. He wasn't moving, wasn't barking instructions. His mouth twitched, and then nothing. Captain Rains called. No answer. Cassie stepped closer, the heat already biting through her gear. Captain, he didn't respond. His eyes were wide, unblinking. She glanced toward the warehouse. Cries for help pierced the crackling roar of fire. Someone was still inside. Cassie didn't wait. She grabbed a spare mask, checked her tank, and bolted toward the entrance without being told. Because sometimes you couldn't wait for permission. Inside the building, it was worse than she'd imagined. The chemical smoke stung her eyes instantly, even behind the shield. Flames had already licked their way through the shelving. Plastic drums hissed and buckled. Sparks shot through overhead wires. She moved low, steady, breathing shallow. "Fire department," she called out. "If you can hear me, shout." A faint cough answered to her left. She turned, and then she saw her. A teenage girl no older than 17, curled behind a fallen cart of bleach containers, clutching a wrench with trembling hands. Cassie crouched, crawling toward her. "You okay?" she asked gently. The girl's mouth moved. No sound. Cassie checked her oxygen. Tank was steady for now. She fitted a backup mask over the girl's face. "Hold on to me. We're walking out of here." The girl didn't argue. Cassie stood, lifted her halfway over her shoulder, and turned back toward the smoke. The flames weren't waiting, and neither could she. Back outside, the crew was beginning to notice. "Where the hell is she?" Torres snapped. Mertz still hadn't moved. "Was that?" Cassie, someone muttered. They all looked toward the entrance, just in time to see her stumble out, dragging the girl, soot-streaked, one glove missing. The girl collapsed into Dawson's arms. Cassie dropped to one knee. She was shaking but upright. "Still breathing?" "Barely." Then she looked straight at Mertz and said, "There's more people in there. You coming or not?" And for the first time, he blinked. The hesitation lasted only a second longer. Then Mertz yanked his radio to his mouth, barking orders so loud the static cracked. "Ventilation on the west side, Miller Hodges, back her up inside." Now? Cassie didn't wait to celebrate. She had already turned back toward the warehouse. But her steps felt heavier now. Her oxygen tank was reading lower than it should have. She tapped the gauge. Still enough, just barely. As Miller and Hodges caught up beside her, she gave a quick nod and pointed. "Left corridor's clear, there's a stairwell at the end. I heard shouting from up top." Miller grunted. "You sure?" She didn't answer, just moved. The second floor was worse. The ceiling tiles were melting, dripping tar-like globs that singed when they hit. A tangle of extension cords sparked along the floor, and thick smoke made it impossible to see beyond a few feet. They found the next two trapped workers in the break room, both coughing violently, one trying to crawl toward the doorway. Cassie helped them up, guiding them carefully to the stairwell. Hodges supported the weaker one. Just before reaching the stairs, she stumbled. A sharp pain stabbed her ribs. Her breaths were too fast now. She checked her tank again, pressure dropping. She reached for her backup, but the connector hissed. No seal. It was defective. Her throat began to burn. She looked at Miller. "You take them. I'll cover the rear." Miller hesitated, eyes on her. He nodded once, then guided the others down the steps. Alone now. Smoke swirled like wet cotton in her helmet. Her vision narrowed. Each inhale brought less relief. Stay conscious. Stay focused. She forced her legs to keep moving. The warehouse groaned, metal supports twisting as fire ate through insulation. A beam crashed down behind her, and she staggered but kept upright. Then faintly another voice, a man's voice, crying out, not from the floor, from the far side of the upper level. She turned back and walked straight into the dark. Jimmy McConnell arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the first dispatch. Off duty, but he'd come anyway, he always did when things turned serious. He found the chief standing near the emergency perimeter radio, in one hand, pacing. "What's the status?" Jimmy asked. "We've got 4 out. 2 still inside," Mertz said grimly. Jimmy narrowed his eyes. "Who?" "An employee and Rodriguez." He meant Cassie. Jimmy felt something tighten in his chest. Cassie found the last man collapsed near the northeast wall, half covered in fallen drywall. He was unconscious, breathing shallowly, his shirt soaked with some unknown chemical. She tried to lift him, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Her knees hit the floor. She coughed hard, then again, and her tank gave a final click, empty. Her breaths came raw now, like dragging air through broken glass. Her hands trembled slick with sweat and soot. She tried once more to lift him, then dragged him by his arms inch by inch toward the exit. 5 feet, 10 feet. She could see orange light bleeding through the smoke ahead. A shape. Someone moving. And then she blacked out. She woke to pressure arms under her back, voices calling her name. Flashlights blinding her through the smoke. Jimmy's voice cut through it all. Cassie, breathe. You're okay. I got you. The air tasted like metal, but it was there. She was breathing through someone else's tank now, and she was alive. The last man had made it out too. Jimmy had carried them both. The sun was rising by the time they returned to the station. Everyone was quiet, even the guys who used to smirk when she walked past. Even Torres. They watched her as she removed her gear. Her hands were shaking, lips cracked and blistered from heat exposure. But she stood tall. The cracked oxygen tank lay beside her locker. Its seal had failed. She picked it up and carried it out to the back of the station. Jimmy followed. They sat on the concrete steps behind the engine bay in silence. Finally, he spoke. You shouldn't have gone in with a faulty tank. I didn't know it was faulty, she replied. He glanced at her. And if you had? Cassie exhaled the breath still ragged. I would have gone anyway. Jimmy nodded slowly. That's what scares me. A week later, the town newspaper ran her photo on the front page. Local firefighter saved 6 in chemical blaze. 2 days after that, a call came from the state office. She'd been nominated for the Medal of Valor. Mertz told her in person. He didn't congratulate her, just stood in the hallway with a paper in hand. They want you at the Capitol next month. Ceremony. Medal presentation. Cassie looked at the notice, then at him. Why now, she asked. He shifted uncomfortably. Because someone made noise. Cassie narrowed her eyes. Not you. He didn't answer, just walked away. Later that night, she sat on the station's roof with Jimmy watching lightning far off in the distance. You going to accept the medal, he asked. She didn't answer at first. Then she looked down at the repaired tank beside her, now sealed with a piece of duct tape holding a handwritten tag that read, This failed. She tapped it gently. If I go, she said, this goes with me. The Capitol was hotter than she expected. Sticky summer air wrapped around Cassie's dress uniform like an extra layer of fabric sweat collecting under the collar. The State House steps were wide marble grey and crawling with photographers. A red carpet was rolled out, not glamorous, just formal. Government kind of formal. Cassie didn't like formal. The other honorees stood in neat rose medals already pinned. A firefighter from downstate who'd rescued 3 kids from a river. A cop who stopped a hostage crisis. A nurse who had performed CPR for 22 minutes straight. And then there was her, youngest one here. Only woman in turnout gear. And the only one carrying something besides herself. The oxygen tank, dented, scorched, valve still broken. It hung from a canvas strap on her shoulder like a strange, heavy purse. People stared. Of course they did. But she didn't shrink from it. She let them stare. Inside the building, officials handed her a program, then gestured to her assigned seat in the second row. Behind her, whispers, Is that the Langley Ridge girl? She's the one who ran in without backup, right? Why the hell's she carrying that tank? She sat with her back straight and her palms resting on her knees. The air conditioning hummed too loud. Her mind kept drifting back to Station 49, back to that damn chalkboard. Her name still wasn't on it. The ceremony was long. Too many speeches, too much clapping. She hardly heard any of it until her name was called. Firefighter Cassandra Rodriguez, Langley Ridge Fire Station 49.
She rose,
Walked down the aisle slowly, and took the stage. There was applause, polite, curious. The state fire chief extended the medal on a red ribbon. Cassie bowed slightly, allowing him to slip it over her head. Then, without waiting for instruction, she stepped up to the microphone. She wasn't scheduled to speak. But no one stopped her. She set the oxygen tank on the podium with a loud clang. A few gasps in the crowd. She looked up. I almost didn't make it out. The room went still. My tank failed, mid-rescue. That's what this is. The one I wore that night. Silence, tight, uncertain. But I kept going because someone needed me. And because I had trained for this. I wasn't afraid of the fire. I was afraid of never being seen, never being heard. She glanced down at the scorched tank, then back to the rows of suited officials. I didn't get this medal because I'm brave. I got it because someone froze and I didn't. Another pause. I'm accepting this today, but not alone. She looked to the back of the auditorium where Jimmy stood quietly near the wall. He nodded once. Cassie lifted the oxygen tank, held it beside her like a partner. And next time someone tells you a woman doesn't belong on the front line, she said softly, just show them what she can carry. The applause this time was louder, real. She walked off stage slowly, chest-tight, hands damp. No one tried to take the tank from her. Somehow, it had become the story. Back in Langley Ridge, the reaction was mixed. The town paper called her a hero with humility. Local news replayed her speech 4 times in a single evening. But at Station 49, it was quiet. Too quiet. A week passed. Then 2. No formal congratulations. No chalkboard update. She started to wonder if things would ever really change. Until the day she arrived for shift and found someone else in her usual locker spot. Her name, Rodriguez, had been moved to a spot in the front row, next to Mertz. She stood staring at it for several seconds, then turned around slowly to find Torres standing nearby, arms crossed. He didn't smirk, didn't crack a joke, just said that was some speech. Cassie tilted her head. You watch it. He nodded. I still think you're reckless. She waited for the insult that usually followed. But instead he said, but I'd go into a building with you now. Cassie blinked. That was it. The closest thing to respect she'd ever get from him. And somehow it felt more solid than applause. Later that week, she was asked to mentor a new recruit, a young woman named Kiara. Nervous, smart, full of questions. Cassie watched her fumble with her turnout straps on the first day, then without a word stepped forward and helped her tighten them. The other guys watched. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Something had shifted. Not a full turn, but a start. That night, Jimmy joined her on the station's back steps again. The air was cooler now, summer folding into fall. Cassie had the tank beside her as always. Jimmy glanced at it. You ever gonna let that thing go? Cassie smiled faintly. Not yet. Why? She exhaled slowly. Because it reminds me. Of what? She looked out over the dark parking lot. Of the fire. The silence. The weight of not being seen. And then softly, that I had to almost die. Just to finally be believed. Jimmy nodded once, then didn't say anything else. They just sat, listening to the hum of quiet and the low hiss of something beginning to heal. The fall brought change, though not the kind that made headlines. Station 49 didn't transform overnight, but under the surface things were shifting one unspoken gesture at a time. The chalkboard now listed Cassie's name consistently, in ink. No more erasures, and on call-outs she noticed something else when she reached for her gear. Someone else was sometimes already there, handing her a strap, adjusting her radio, nodding once without words. It wasn't friendliness, not exactly, but it was respect. She took it. 3 weeks after the award ceremony, Cassie was assigned to lead her first drill. Officially, it was a Saturday morning unusually crisp for October, and she stood at the training yard with 5 others in turnout gear waiting for the last 2 to arrive, Torres and Mertz. She'd requested them both to be present, deliberately. When they showed up, Mertz offered a tight nod. Torres raised an eyebrow. You in charge? He asked, half smirking. I am, Cassie replied, clipboard in hand. And you're late. For a beat, he stared at her. Then something rare, a smile, faint and crooked. All right then, Lieutenant. He said it like a joke, but she didn't correct him, and he didn't take it back. During the drill, she noticed Kiara, her new trainee, struggling to keep up on the hose crawl. Her footing was off her rhythm, ragged. Cassie crouched beside her while the others reset. You watching your breathing? She asked gently. Kiara nodded, ashamed. Just can't get it right. The gear's so heavy. Cassie rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. First time I wore this, I felt like I was drowning in it. Kiara looked up surprised. But you made it through the warehouse fire, she whispered. With a bad tank. Cassie nodded slowly. I didn't carry the gear. I carried the reason. Kiara blinked. Cassie let it hang for a moment, then stood. You'll find yours. That afternoon, Kiara finished the drill without faltering, and Cassie watched her walk off the field with steady steps. Back at the station, things weren't entirely smooth. There were still mutterings, still long silences in the locker room. One night, Cassie walked in to find a message scrawled in permanent marker on her locker door. Awards don't make you a hero. She stood there for a full minute, then grabbed a Sharpie from her bag. Underneath, she wrote, "No, but action does." She never brought it up to the others. But 2 days later, the message was scrubbed clean. No one admitted it. She didn't ask who did it. The biggest change came when Chief Whitman visited the station. It was rare for the district chief to visit outposts like theirs, but he stepped out of his SUV that Thursday afternoon wearing pressed slacks and a tight smile. Mertz greeted him at the curb. Cassie stood beside the engine watching. Whitman scanned the station. Then his eyes landed on her. "You must be Rodriguez." "I am." He approached, extending a hand. "You made quite an impression at the Capitol." Cassie shook his hand firmly. "I wasn't trying to impress." He chuckled. That's what made it impressive. She didn't smile. He motioned to the oxygen tank resting by the steps. "You still keep that around?" She nodded. "I don't plan to forget." Whitman turned to Mertz. "Seems like this station has a future lieutenant on its hands." Mertz didn't respond. Cassie did. "I'm not rushing anywhere," she said. "I just want the door to stay open. For the next one. For Kiara." Whitman nodded once. Spoken like someone who gets it. That evening, Mertz called her into his office. It was the first time in 2 years she'd ever seen him behind a desk not covered in call logs. He gestured to a seat. "I won't pretend I handled things right," he said, looking down. Cassie sat slowly, surprised but silent. He exhaled. "You scared the hell out of me that night." She raised an eyebrow. "The fire." "No. That you didn't wait. That you didn't need me." She sat with that for a moment. "Maybe I didn't, but someone did." He looked up. "I should have backed you sooner. I see that now." She nodded. That was all he could offer. That was enough. A week later, she came into the station early. Still dark outside. Coffee still burning on the warmer. And there it was. A box, sitting in front of her locker, inside her new nameplate. "See? Rodriguez. Lieutenant Trainee." No announcement, no speech. Just the quiet shift of history happening in silence. She picked it up with trembling hands, and across the room Kiara grinned. Cassie smiled back. For the first time, it felt like she belonged. The title didn't change everything. Cassie still faced doubters, still felt eyes linger a bit too long when she took command, still heard muttered questions, usually from visiting units. Is she really in charge? That's the one from the warehouse fire, right? She looks too young. But now those whispers didn't shake her, because when she spoke, her crew listened. When she gave orders, they moved. And when fires broke out, she didn't hesitate, and neither did they. One afternoon in early December, a call came through from a trailer park just outside town. Electrical fire, several homes at risk. Cassie led the response team. As they pulled into the narrow lanes, smoke already drifted through the winter air, mixing with the scent of melting insulation and pine. A woman ran toward them, clutching a child to her chest. "There's still someone inside," she sobbed. "My dad. He's in the back bedroom. He uses a chair. He can't move fast." Cassie looked at Torres, then at Hodges. "You've got suppression. Kiara, you're with me." The young trainee nodded instantly. They moved fast, weaving past toppled furniture, heat pressing against their faces. Flames licked through the hallway ceiling. The smoke was thin but hot, blistering. They found the old man in a recliner, dazed, his oxygen mask half on a small white dog, curled trembling by his leg. Cassie knelt in front of him. "You ready to go?" she asked gently. He stared at her like an angel had walked through the fire. She and Kiara helped him into a chair with wheels, then pulled him out together, steady, swift side by side. Outside, the woman cried in relief as they emerged. Cassie handed her the dog, then helped settle her father onto a gurney. Behind her, Kiara coughed softly and pulled off her mask. "Lieutenant." "Yeah, you didn't even flinch in there." Cassie looked back at the smoking trailer. "I've already been through worse." That night, she stood in the gear room, hands resting on her locker door. The old oxygen tank still sat beside her locker, scorched, dented, untouched. It didn't need to be center stage anymore, but she didn't throw it out. She placed it gently into a glass case Jimmy had found at a salvage yard, then pinned her first Medal of Valor ribbon right beside it. She taped a label to the glass. This failed. She didn't. A few days before Christmas, Cassie was asked to speak at the high school career night. It was a small auditorium, mostly juniors and seniors, restless, half listening. She stepped up to the mic, wearing her uniform, her badge newly polished. I was told I could come here and tell you what it's like to be a firefighter, she began. Some students leaned forward, others slouched. I could tell you about training, about ladders, hoses, gear. I could talk about saving lives. And yes, all that matters. A pause. But none of it matters if you don't believe in your own voice. She glanced toward the back where Kiara stood, arms crossed, proud. There was a time I did everything right and still wasn't heard. Still wasn't seen. Not until smoke filled the air and someone else couldn't move. Another pause. So here's what I'll say. Don't wait for a fire to prove you matter. Later, as students filed out, one young girl stayed behind. She wore a denim jacket, bit her nails nervously. Can girls really do that? She asked. Be you. Cassie smiled. You already are. You just haven't stepped into the fire yet. That night, Cassie sat alone at the back of Station 49. The air was sharp with frost. Her breath clouded in front of her. Beside her, the old tank in its new case gleamed under the yard light. Jimmy joined her again, handing over a steaming mug. Thought you might want tea instead of coffee for once. She accepted it without a word. For a long while they sat in silence. Then Jimmy asked, So, how do you feel now? Cassie looked up at the stars. She thought about the girl at the school, about Kiara growing stronger by the day, about the day she almost didn't make it out. And finally she answered, Lighter. Some scars don't show up on skin. Some battles are won in silence just by not giving up. Cassie didn't want fame or applause. She wanted to be seen. And more than that, she wanted others like her to never feel invisible again. Have you ever had to fight just to be heard, to prove you belong in a room that didn't want you? If this story reminded you of something personal, we'd love to hear it in the comments below. And if you stayed with us all the way to the end, thanks for being here. See you in the next one.